Sweeping shots of rugged desert terrain, rocky outcrops, steep canyons, sparse vegetation. The landscape appears desolate and uninhabitable. The American Southwest, 1860s through 1880s. 10,000 U.S. Army soldiers searched these mountains for a handful of Apache warriors. They rarely found them. This is the story of how the Apache turned the harshest terrain on Earth into an invisible fortress. Camera pans across seemingly empty mountainside. Suddenly, a camouflaged Apache warrior emerges from what appeared to be solid rock. The Apache didn't just survive in the desert. They mastered it. While the U.S. Army struggled with the heat, limited water, and brutal terrain, Apache warriors moved through it like ghosts. Their secret? Hidden shelters so ingeniously designed that soldiers could walk within feet and never know they were there. An Apache warrior named Cochise, 30s, leads a small group through rocky terrain. They stop at what looks like an unremarkable cliff face. The Apache built several types of shelters, each designed for specific purposes. But the most remarkable were their hidden refuges, wickiups concealed in caves, rock overhangs, and narrow canyons that were nearly impossible to detect. Detailed demonstration of wickiup construction. The traditional Apache wickiup was a dome-shaped shelter, but the hidden versions were architectural marvels. Let me show you how they built them. Camera shows various concealed locations: cave mouths, dense brush areas, rock overhangs. First, location was everything. Apache scouts would spend days finding the perfect spot. They looked for natural concealment, rock formations that created shadows, vegetation that grew in unusual patterns, terrain that discouraged pursuit, elevated positions with clear sight lines for miles, multiple escape routes through narrow passages, natural water sources hidden from view, rock overhangs that dispersed smoke, terrain that was difficult for horses, but easy on foot. Reenactment shows warriors gathering materials. The frame was built from flexible poles, willow, cottonwood, or oak saplings. But here's the genius. They only used materials found within 100 yards of the site. Nothing looked transported. Nothing looked out of place. Demonstration of bending poles into dome shape. They'd create a circular base, about 8 to 12 feet in diameter, then bend the poles inward to form a dome. The poles were tied with yucca fiber or strips of hide, materials that would decompose naturally, leaving no trace. Detailed shots of layering process. Now came the real artistry. The wickiup was covered in layers. First layer, grass and brush from the immediate area. Second layer, bare grass or sotol leaves, arranged to shed rain. Third layer, dirt and rocks that matched the surrounding terrain. Final touch, live plants transplanted onto the structure. Time-lapse showing completed shelter blending into landscape. Within weeks, the shelter became indistinguishable from the hillside. Moss would grow. Insects would nest. It became part of the mountain itself. Camera explores a completed hidden shelter. But the Apache didn't stop at camouflage. They engineered features that would make modern survival experts jealous. Demonstration of fire pit design. Smoke was a death sentence. It could be seen for miles. So the Apache developed the smokeless fire technique. They dig a pit beneath the wickiup, sometimes 3 feet deep, with a narrow air channel. They burned only the driest wood, ironwood, mesquite, that produced minimal smoke. The rock overhang, or cave roof, would disperse what little smoke there was. Thermal camera shows heat dissipation. From even 50 yards away, there was no visible smoke plume. The Army never knew they. Camera shows cleverly disguised doorways. The entrance was never obvious. Often it was positioned behind a boulder or beneath an overhang, requiring you to crouch or crawl. Some shelters had false entrances, dead ends that would trap pursuers. The real entrance might be through a crack in the rocks, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Demonstration of narrow passages leading out of shelter. Many hidden wickiups had secondary exits, narrow passages through rock formations that led to other canyons or high ground. If discovered, warriors could vanish in seconds while their pursuers struggled through the single known entrance. Shows ingenious water gathering system. In the desert, water meant survival. Apache shelters often featured natural rock basins that collected rainwater, or were positioned near hidden springs. They'd create channels using flat rocks to direct water into storage areas, natural cisterns in the rock. Camera reveals hidden storage cavities. Food was stored in sealed pottery jars, placed in cool, dry rock crevices. These natural refrigerators could keep dried meat, mesquite beans, and acorns fresh for months. Some storage sites were separate from living areas. If the shelter was discovered, food caches remained hidden. Maps and aerial views showing network of shelters. But individual shelters were just the beginning. The Apache created networks, a series of hidden refuges across their territory, each a day's travel apart. This network turned the entire mountain range into their fortress. Exhausted soldiers on horseback trudging through desert. They were here. The tracks lead to this canyon. Soldiers search frantically but find nothing. Camera reveals Apache warriors watching from concealed position 20 feet above. Time and again, Army patrols would track Apache warriors to a specific location, only to find nothing. The warriors had simply vanished. Meanwhile, the soldiers were exposed, exhausted, and far from their supply lines. We could track them to a certain point. Then it was as if they dissolved into the rocks themselves. Captain John Burke, U.S. Army, 1872. The Apache can live where our soldiers would die of thirst in 2 days. General George Crook, 1883. Some Apache hideouts became legendary. Let me tell you about 3 that baffled the Army for years. Dramatic footage of Rocky Fortress in Dragoon Mountains. Deep in the Dragoon Mountains of Arizona, Chief Cochise maintained a fortress that held off thousands of soldiers for over a decade. The stronghold was a maze of rock formations with hidden shelters tucked into caves and overhangs. Water flowed from springs that were invisible from below. There was only one practical entrance, and it could be defended by a handful of warriors against an army. The army tried repeatedly to storm it, attempting assault. Every attempt failed. Cochise and his people remained untouched until he chose to negotiate on his terms. Footage of narrow, winding canyon in Sierra Madre. In the Sierra Madre Mountains of Mexico, Geronimo maintained a network of shelters so well hidden that even Apache scouts working for the army couldn't find them. One canyon hideout was described as requiring warriors to walk single file through water for half a mile, with rock walls rising hundreds of feet on either side. At the end, a paradise valley with grass, water, and game, completely invisible from any direction. Mysterious cave with multiple openings overlooking valley. In the Chiricahua Mountains, there was a cave system the Apache called the Cave of the Windows. It had multiple chambers, each with openings that provided 360-degree views of the surrounding valleys. Warriors could see anyone approaching from miles away, yet the cave entrance was a narrow crack hidden behind brush. Inside, generations of Apache had lived, and army patrols passed by dozens of times without ever knowing it was there. But the shelters alone weren't enough. The Apache employed a complete system of survival techniques that made them nearly impossible to track or catch. Demonstration of walking on rocks, brushing out footprints. Apache warriors traveled without leaving tracks. They walked on rocks, stepped in each other's footprints, and used brush to erase any sign of passage. They could cross miles of desert and leave less trace than a single deer. Shows abandoned campsite with obvious signs. They'd sometimes create false camps, shelters built to be discovered, with old fire pits and scattered belongings. While the army celebrated finding an Apache camp, the warriors were miles away, laughing. Thermal imagery of night travel. Most movement happened at night. Apache warriors had incredible night vision and knowledge of the terrain. They could travel 30 miles in darkness over mountain trails that would be treacherous in daylight. Shows smoke signals, rock cairns, bent branches. A network of signals warned of army movements. Smoke by day, fire by night, but signals so subtle that soldiers dismissed them as natural phenomena. A certain arrangement of rocks, a bent branch. Each carried meaning to those who knew the code. Reenactment of army camp at night with mysterious sounds. The Apache understood fear. They'd appear suddenly, strike, then vanish. Army camps would wait to find their horses gone, supplies destroyed, and not a single guard had seen anyone. The psychological impact was devastating. Frustrated officers studying maps. So why couldn't the most powerful military in the world catch a few hundred Apache warriors? The answer is simple. The Apache weren't just better at fighting. They were better at living. U.S. Army needed supply wagons every few days. Required 10+ gallons of water per man daily. Moved slowly with heavy equipment. Limited to trails and flat terrain. Horses needed grain and rest. Soldiers struggled in heat. Apache warriors could survive on a handful of food for days. Found water where soldiers saw none. Traveled light and fast. Moved through impossible terrain on foot. Horses were optional, not essential. Built for the desert climate. The Army was trying to fight a conventional war. The Apache were living their lives. Every rock, every canyon, every hidden spring was part of their home. They weren't hiding from the desert. They were part of it. Eventually, the Army realized they couldn't beat the Apache at their own game. So they changed tactics. Historical photos of Apache scouts in Army uniforms. They recruited Apache scouts, warriors from rival bands or those who chose peace. Only Apache could track Apache. Only those who knew the hidden places could find them. Photos of General Crook and negotiation scenes. General George Crook understood something other officers didn't. The Apache weren't terrorists or savages. They were people fighting for their homeland with every skill they possessed. He began negotiating rather than just fighting. Historical footage of Apache on reservations. By 1886, most Apache had surrendered. Not because they were beaten in battle, but because their way of life had become unsustainable. The buffalo were gone. Their traditional hunting grounds were filled with settlers. Geronimo, the last major resistance leader, surrendered in September 1886. But here's what's remarkable. He wasn't captured. He chose to surrender. Even at the end, the Army couldn't catch him. Contemporary footage of Apache people, cultural centers, preserved sites. Today, some of those hidden shelters still exist. You can visit places like Cochise's stronghold in Arizona. But many remain secret, known only to Apache people who keep their ancestors' knowledge alive. Interviews with Apache cultural experts represented. Our grandparents didn't just build shelters. They built a relationship with the land. Every rock had meaning. Every plant had purpose. The Army saw empty desert. We saw home. Modern survivalists study Apache techniques. Military special forces train in methods the Apache perfected. The skills that kept a people alive for generations in impossible conditions still have lessons to teach. Camera slowly zooms in on a rock face. Just before the shot ends, the faint outline of a hidden entrance becomes barely visible. The Apache warriors didn't outsmart the Army through superior weapons or numbers. They did it through perfect adaptation, intimate knowledge of their environment, and shelters so ingeniously hidden that they became part of the landscape itself. Camera pulls back to reveal the vast, beautiful desert landscape. The next time you look at wilderness and see emptiness, remember, the Apache saw home. And somewhere in those rocks and canyons, the hidden sanctuaries remain, invisible monuments to human ingenuity, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a people and their land.